The Michael Deacon program. Is the embassy.
And welcome back for another special edition of the Michael Deacon program. I'm pleased to see all of you here this evening, and I apologize for the wait and the delay there. Boys and girls, technology is never on our side. And of course today I'll be joined by a very special guest. Mr. Michael Cremo is here, the author of numerous books including Forbidden Archeology, The Hidden History of the Human Race. Cremo is internationally recognized for his research and lectures on the suppression of archaeological evidence for a much older humanity. And he is on the line right now. Let's bring him right on in. Mr. Cremo, how are you, sir?
Pretty good. You're another Michael.
Yes, sir, as you know. Oh, yes. And Michael, I'm so glad you're here. We've done this so many times in the past before. And, it's been about 3-4 years perhaps since the last time you were here.
Seems like it, doesn't it?
It really does. Yeah, time has flown by as it does. And Michael, again, it's always an honor and pleasure to have you here on the program. I hope you're doing well out there, wherever you are.
Oh, I'm in Los Angeles.
Not far from me.
And you're on the West Coast also.
That's right.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been pleasant weather. Somehow all my health things are in order, and
good. Very good. I'm glad you're okay and doing well. And yes, the weather has been kind of cold out here in these parts. So
Yeah,
I'm hoping you're
what
covered
we
up.
call cold.
Yeah, exactly. What we called cold. The other, the rest of the East Coast out there, the rest of the world, the rest of the nation here, they laugh at us. What we consider cold is just another day in the park to them.
Yeah, yeah. This is, I mean, really, the weather here would be like a nice spring day in other places.
Pretty much. It's pretty wild. And Michael, I don't really need to do the whole introduction with you here on this program. Everyone already knows who you are. And Mr. Cremo, I hate to start things off this way with you, but I did want to mention uh, a documentary that was released on Netflix with Graham Hancock. I'm not sure if you watched that yet.
I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen some of Graham's posts about the reaction to it.
Right, it hasn't really been a good reaction at all. It seems like a lot of people are calling him names and they're accusing him of being a racist, which I think is absurd.
Well, yes, I think it is, but that's why I call my topic forbidden archaeology, and it has a wider meaning beyond my work. People have kind of adopted the term. I've seen forbidden archaeology websites and forbidden archaeology conferences and things like that. The title. So I would include all of the research that's going on in different fields of alternative history and alternative archaeology as part of that topic. And if something is forbidden, it's because it's perceived as dangerous somehow by whatever powers might be,
right,
whose interests are threatened. And I think probably a reason why this kind of work, whether it's Graham Hancock's or mine or Robert Schock's or John Anthony West or anyone else who's Hugh Newman, so many people,
right,
Brian Forrester, are operating in this field. And I think we probably all have similar experiences. There's all different kinds of power in the world. There's political power, there's economic power, there's military power, there's all kinds of power. There's also intellectual power, which is a very subtle power, but nevertheless, it is very powerful. And what those who possess it have the ability to do is define our sense of identity, who we are. And basically, they're giving us answers of the kind, well, you're a machine made of molecules, basically in competition with others for survival. And, that kind of keeps people in their place. If you define a person's identity for him or her, then they naturally act according to that sense of identity. And, you get a whole political, economic, and social and religious institutions and organizations set up on that basis. And if someone disturbs that, then those who have the positions of intellectual authority and power in society don't like it very much. Are you there, Michael? Are you there, Michael? something's gone wrong, I guess. I can't hear you. Are you there? Can you hear me? I can't hear you. Hello?
Oh my. I was having lots of difficulty here. I'm not sure what just happened. That was rather bizarre. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not quite sure what the hell just happened there. It seems like I was cut off somehow. That was weird. That was a little paranormal there. No clue what just happened there, boys and girls, but I will try to get a hold of Michael Cremo. He must have freaked out. Like anyone would, normally freak out when someone is being interviewed and then they go away. So I don't blame him for being a little worried there. I was a little worried there too. I got freaked out, but we'll call him back here in a moment. Boys and girls, my God. See, this is what happens, folks. You never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen when you're doing a live show. And this is a great example of just that. I know Michael must have been freaking out there. Now he's calling me back. Let's see what he has to say for himself. Mr. Cremo, how are you? I apologize. I have no idea what just happened there.
Yeah, I realized at a certain point that you weren't there.
Oh my goodness, I am so sorry.
Yeah, so
Oh yeah, so Mr. Cremo, again, I apologize for that. I don't know what the hell happened. I'm just glad to be alive.
Yeah. So we were talking about the reactions to the Netflix.
The very wild reactions that people had, and of course, I didn't really think it was really that controversial whatsoever. These are things that you have personally talked about many moons ago, way before this, and we'll get into that in a moment here. But when you hear things like that, does that at all shock you at all that mainstream media is having this sort of reaction all these years later?
Well, I think it's basically a losing battle for them, but it's like they have this idea that they are the gatekeepers for what kinds of knowledge and information people get through media. But I guess social media has kind of broken this down somewhat. There are just so many channels through which people can get information these days. And they're all looking for content, and if they can get some content, well, that's good. But I mean, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, it would be easier for them to control things. But it's not so easy these days.
Right. It definitely isn't very easy anymore to sort of suppress all this information. And of course, that happened with you very early on in your career. as well. This sort of reaction, going all the way back to 1996, when you first appeared on the NBC special, The Mysterious Origins of Man.
Yeah, I think Graham was also on that program.
I think
some
you might
of the
have been.
other
Yeah.
alternative. So I think we're all kind of used to it. And the tactic that the gatekeepers, let's call them, usually employ is to ignore something, don't give it any publicity, because by critiquing it, you're calling more attention to it. So it's, and I think, just judging from the reactions I've seen to that other program, I think it's possible that this kind of negative publicity is just going to attract more and more attention to these alternative ideas. So
it's par for the course. Eventually, this was going to happen. And I'm sure Mr. Hancock and yourself are more than used to this sort of thing. The media having this sort of view.
Yeah. I think it comes down to the fact that it would be nice to live in a time and a place where one's personal convictions are shared by everyone in the society in which one lives, and all the different elites and centers of power and influence were favorable to these ideas. We often don't have that luxury, and sometimes one has to express. I mean, one has a choice. One can either remain silent or go with the flow, or one can take a little bit of a stand and say, this is my conviction about the history of this planet, or the history of this species or nation or whatever. And why would one do that? It's especially publicly, because everyone can have their own private beliefs. But to express it publicly, I think it's because one has, in addition to one's conviction, the belief that this knowledge is beneficial for people. It's good for people to know. So everyone has to decide, what they're going to do in terms of their personal convictions, if they happen to be different than those of the surrounding society and its power centers and elites.
And Mr. Cremo, just let me ask you, after all these years of research that you've done, what keeps you motivated to keep going on with your research?
Well, one thing leads to another. I've always been sort of intuitive, looking for what steps are being put before me, and I just keep taking those steps, and the journey continues. And it's something I very much appreciate and value and enjoy, is to be on that journey, because I would say, even as a very young child, I was always interested in some certain values and ideas, you say they're my core principles, even from childhood. And one of them is wanting to know the real state of things. You know, what's actually the truth. So I've always pursued that, and you know, I'm still doing that. And I started out with archaeology, you know, because I was interested in the question of human origins, you know, being a member of the human species. You know, I kind of wondered about my ancestry. Where did I come from? You know, people wonder about those things.
Right.
You know, what is my heritage? You know, there's television shows on PBS about that, you know, guiding people through their genealogy, who their ancestors were, and what they did, and when they lived. And most people find it valuable to know things like that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know what's my heritage, what's my ancestry as a human being, not necessarily. Of course, I was also interested in, you know, my unique family history, but I was also interested in the origin of the form of life that I'm in, the human form of life. So that led me into looking at archaeology, because that's the science of human origins. And when I looked into that, it was basically pretty materialistic in the sense that most scientists studying human origins would say, well, you're an evolved ape. You're a machine made of molecules. You know, your essence is purely material. And basically, you're an accident of the evolutionary process. You know, we have DNA, and it gets mutated, and your offspring will be a little bit different than you are, and you know, you add this up, and you find that humans like us first appeared less than 300,000 years ago on this planet. But when I started looking into it, I started finding reports by scientists that show we've existed for far longer than 300,000 years. We've existed for tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years, going back to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth. And that means, well, we need new explanations for human origins. You know, and I think those are going to involve principles that go beyond ordinary matter to things like consciousness. Nobody has explained how consciousness can arise from matter, although they say it did. You know, but I think consciousness has its own independent existence, and that's what we really are. You know, the bodies that we now occupy are like vehicles for an eternal conscious self to maneuver in and occupy and drive around on this level of reality. But this level of reality that we're in now, the world of matter, isn't the total reality. There are other levels of reality that can only be approached by developing the resources that are there within our consciousness. So one thing leads to another. You know, I kind of started out with the stones and the bones of forbidden archaeology, and then moved on to these other topics as well.
Right, right. And early on, what exactly was it about the Vedic texts that drew you in? What was it about India that had you fascinated?
Well, there are a couple of ways that I think about that. One is in terms of reincarnation. So I think I must have had some contact with that place and the disciplines of yoga and meditation and study of the Vedic texts, like the Puranas and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and others. So in this life, when I encountered them again, I was attracted to them. Because I had some previous contact with it. That's one way that I look at it. Leaving that aside, I grew up in a military family. My father was an intelligence officer in the United States Air Force, and that meant something for me as I was growing up, because one thing it meant is, traveled around a lot, the United States, other countries, got exposed to a lot of different worldviews and cultures, and among them was the Indian spiritual culture, which really attracted me. So that's how I got involved in the text. And that's where I got this idea of extreme human antiquity, because these texts, and not just the Vedic text of India, but if you look at the Egyptian texts, Sumerian texts, the literatures of many of the world's great wisdom traditions, they all have this idea that humans like us have existed since the beginning of the history of life on Earth. So that's how I got.
That's what drew you in. Yeah, that's what drew you in essentially, and I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. Many people are attracted to the Veda Bhumi, as they call it, the land of knowledge. They say.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. Among the ancient civilizations, the culture of India has kind of persisted for thousands and thousands of years. Like, the Egyptians were there with, the pharaohs and their whole concept, their whole cosmology and idea, which was the basis of the pyramids and everything like that. But that culture, from the pyramid times, is no longer present. There isn't a vestige of it. Same with many of the other ancient civilizations. But although in India you can find different layers of technology and modern life and networked all over the place, some of the basic fundamental styles of life that go on in the villages is like it was thousands of years ago. They've preserved the literatures, the culture, the rituals, the systems of yoga and meditation, and things of that sort.
And Mr. Cremo, do you still meditate?
Yes, I meditate on the Hare Krishna mantra for at least a couple hours a day.
Okay, wow. Yeah, you're still going very hard with that. I love that, by the way. I'm glad you're still a practitioner.
Well, it's all a part of yoga. Yoga is a Sanskrit word. It means to connect two things. Yeah, to connect the individual soul with the supreme soul,
Right.
The material with the spiritual. And so it's a whole system. And the particular type of yoga that I practice is called Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion. And it means, one thing it means is meditation. So that's one thing, but another thing it means is taking whatever talent or ability that you have, in my case, writing and speaking and things, doing research and things like that, and connect it through yoga with the divine. So you could say my whole life is a meditation.
Which most people have trouble doing. In today's world, they don't have a quiet space or any time to spend meditating, which is unfortunate since meditation is rather important in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, there are different systems of meditation, contemplation, prayer, and different spiritual traditions, whether we're talking about Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever. Most spiritual communities or lineages have what you might call an exoteric aspect to them and a more esoteric aspect. And the external or exoteric aspect usually includes having some kind of place to worship and gather and perform ceremonies and rituals at various important junctures of life and things like that. The more esoteric side usually involves some withdrawal from society, in the sense that Christian monks might go live in a monastery and pray and study the Bible and live lives of simplicity and charity and like that. Or Buddhist monks may do it, others. So, but I think anyone can start, to give a little attention to these things if they want to. Not saying which tradition to
Right.
identify
Yeah.
with. That's up to each individual what they want to do. But I would say all these different traditions have something to offer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And another thing I wanted to ask you was one of the things that first drew me in about the culture, the Indian culture, was Vimanas.
Yeah, they're fascinating, aren't they? Vimanas are the Vedic, they're the flying craft
Right.
mentioned in the Vedic literatures, and they're actually quite detailed descriptions of them. My Forbidden Archeology co-author, Richard Thompson, wrote a book about Vimanas and extraterrestrials, comparing the statements from the Vedic literature, which was written thousands and thousands of years ago, and modern UFO alien type of research. And there were so many parallels where they're talking about the exact same things. And most of these UFO researchers and extraterrestrial contactees, they're not aware of the Vedic literature. And, of course, thousands and thousands of years ago, the people who composed these texts giving elaborate descriptions of flying vehicles that could travel from planet to planet through space or do amazing things in the atmosphere of the Earth, where they didn't have any. They existed a long, long time ago and had no contact with these modern researchers. So why should their accounts be so similar? I think that's because they're both observing the same type of phenomena. So they're kind of like independent witnesses whose descriptions corroborate each other. So,
yeah, it's rather wild once you do read some of these texts that depict these flying crafts in stunning detail. It makes you think, and it makes you contemplate what exactly the ancients were experiencing. What were these things? Were these real crafts? And I would say they definitely saw something going on for sure, that there were these battles in the sky that were also depicted. And yes, sir.
Yeah, well, there's one example from a book called the Bhagavad Purana, or Srimad Bhagavatam, sometimes it's called. It was written 5,000 years ago, but it has a description of a vimana, a craft that attacked a city here on Earth. And this vimana was piloted by a person called Shalva. And he had gotten this vimana, or spacecraft, from a personality who was known as the engineer of the demoniac forces in the universe, the forces of darkness, we could say. And they attacked this city, and the descriptions of the attack are really interesting because they appear to have been using energy beam weapons. And the defenders of the city were also using weapons that resembled modern anti-missile or anti-aircraft weapons.
Right.
And then, as part of the battle, the Shalva used the technology of this craft that was hovering over this city in India called Dwarka. And he was able to manifest three-dimensional holographic images of personalities, soldiers, whatever, to kind of bewilder the defenders. And it's described that this aircraft, this Vimana, had some kind of shielding technology that allowed it to become invisible. Like we have our stealth aircraft these days in our Air Force.
Yes.
That can penetrate some other country's airspace undetected by its radar and things like that. So apparently that's nothing new. It's been around for thousands of years.
And of course, mainstream science dismisses all of these claims.
Yeah. So it's like you say, it is a fascinating topic.
Oh, yeah.
Vimanas.
It's a rather fascinating topic. And for those more interested in the subject, definitely go look up some work there by all kinds of people. I've talked about Vimanas for the longest time. And of course, another thing that we talk about all the time, Mr. Cremo, and of course you do too, is the fact that human civilization, human origins are much, much older than what mainstream science has been teaching us since forever.
Yeah, well, like I said, according to them, the human form of life is just an accident of evolution. You know, they say in the beginning there was no life whatsoever on Earth, you know, a few billion years ago. And they would say that chemicals combined to produce some first living thing. Exactly how that happened, they can't say. There's no set consensus in the world of science how that happened. They're just convinced it happened. And then somehow the single-cell creatures start grouping together to form colonies and eventually multicellular organisms like simple plants, seaweeds, fish, and then those plants and fish and other types of sea creatures gradually somehow they migrate to the land, and then they develop into other forms, and then maybe about 40 or 50 million years ago you get apes and monkeys, and about 6 or 7 million years ago you get upright walking kind of ape-like creatures, ape men we call them today. And then finally about 300,000 years ago humans like us appear. And if you ran that tape of evolution again, it's not very likely that you'd get it. So they would just say we're a cosmic accident, you know, evolution by natural selection and random mutations. So I don't really see it like that.
You don't believe in that?
I think the universe actually has a purpose, and the universe is consciousness based, not matter based. The purpose of life in this universe is to qualify oneself as a being of pure consciousness and be able to migrate to a plane of existence that is beyond the kind of cycles of creation and destruction that go on the material level of reality, and that those cycles of creation and destruction are experienced on different levels. They're experienced on the level of the individual in a particular body at this time. Like I'm in a human body right now. It came into existence many decades ago, and it's at some point in the not too distant future, it's going to cease functioning, and the conscious self that I am will move to another material bodily vehicle.
Yeah.
So, and there are many different kinds: plant bodies, animal bodies, insect bodies, fish bodies. There are all kinds of bodies. The human form of life is special because it is in this human form of life that we have the intelligence and ability to understand what our position is and to try to educate ourselves, qualify ourselves to get out of that whole cycle of taking one material body after another and what the Buddhists call samsara, cycle of birth and death. So that's the real purpose, for the universe. It's like our school where we have a chance to educate ourselves on what our real identity is beyond the particular bodily vehicle that we inhabit at the present moment.
Right. There is there is something special about us, no doubt.
Yeah, and so to me, it's since I accept that the universe has a purpose and that purpose is fulfilled best in the human form of life, that the human form of life should be around from the beginning. Of course, if you believe that the whole universe is just some cosmic accident, some fluctuation of some quantum energy field, and that the human form is just an accident of evolution, so that we're accidental creatures in an accidental universe, well, that's going to seem very strange.
Yeah.
But one has to accept the results of whatever choices one makes about how to see the world and how to see one's place in it. So, and everyone has free will.
Let me ask you. Let me ask you this, Mr. Cremo. Do you believe that we were genetically engineered, that we were modified?
Yes, maybe not in the exact sense that some of the researchers who are currently expressing such ideas accept. But yeah, I do think our forms are the result of some intelligence operating on some higher level of reality, having something to do with the origin of the kinds of bodies that we have. They're like vehicles. So in many cases, researchers accept the basic outline of the materialistic evolution theories, which have humans like us appearing about 300,000 years ago, or no less than that. And they tend to say evolution went on according to the standard type until about 400,000 years ago, around the time that scientists think that Homo erectus existed. And some of these researchers propose that extraterrestrial beings, not of any divine type, but just ordinary biological beings from some other part of the solar system or the universe or the galaxy, came here, and for the purpose of developing, and sometimes it's described as searching for gold and mining gold and things like that, that these extraterrestrial beings manipulated the genome of the Homo erectus type creatures that were around at that time and turned them into modern human beings and kind of used them as slaves to work the gold mines and refine the gold and things like that. I mean, that's one version. And I accept in principle the idea that, yes, intelligent beings from elsewhere beyond this terrestrial level, this terrestrial Earth planet, or I would prefer to say terrestrial level of reality, they manipulated the genome to produce human beings. So I would say, yeah, I accept the principle that some beings off this planet came here. They have something to do with they manipulated things, however they did it.
Yeah, this is a notion that
and that way engineered
Yes.
the human form. The difference I would have is that I accept there are different kinds of extraterrestrial beings. There are some from the gross level of matter, which is where we are now. There are beings from more subtle material realms that people in different cultures have known by the name angels, gods, demigods, demigoddesses, genes. There's all different kinds of names for them in different cultures. And then beyond that, there's what I call the level of pure consciousness, and there are beings at that level. So any of them could come and visit our planet. Other beings from other planets on the level of gross matter, more subtle beings from that level of reality, and pure beings of pure consciousness or spirit, if you prefer that word, come down from their level of reality, and they have something to do with our presence here. So, and I guess, so I accept a lot of the principles that those researchers are working with, but I would apply them a little differently to say that the intervention took place at the beginning of the history of life on Earth, that the beings, yes, they're extraterrestrial, they're intelligent, but they might not be flesh and blood types of creatures similar to us on the terrestrial level of reality, but just from another planet on this level. Or they may have been these more subtle beings, or they may have been the purely spiritual beings. And so,
Right. Well, I definitely do subscribe to that notion or theory that we pretty much were probably helped along the way genetically, for sure. I mean, it's hard to imagine human beings as we are today, knowing that most humans out there they're not the smartest or the brightest. So it's hard to imagine that even back then there were so many people out there at one time, so many different civilizations that came before us that had all this vast knowledge and most likely advanced technology that we suppress, that's been suppressed rather. Again, it's just difficult to imagine that we just sort of evolved and basically had all this knowledge already in a sense.
yeah, there's some pretty amazing things going on today. But in one sense, I think many of our technologies that we use today or that people use today are attempts by us to replicate abilities people may have had naturally and maybe still do possess naturally, like the ability to see things at a distance. There's something called remote viewing.
Sure.
That certain people, they have the ability to detect, what's going on at a great distance, maybe halfway around the world. And there are researchers who do experiments with people in remote viewing, and they demonstrate it's something that we all have. But
Well, I'm glad you. Well, Mr.
Actually,
Cremo, I'm glad you mentioned that because this is what I mean by the fact that we were sort of um, our DNA our essence basically was altered and given these sort of abilities that you speak of.
yeah, we have to be given them. We don't manufacture them ourselves. So, and even there's documented evidence that for decades the intelligence services of different countries, including our own, have made use of these powers like remote viewing to try to get an edge over their
Right, yes.
competitors. But the point I was really trying to make was that our, say, like our smartphone technology, where you can see, on your videos that run on your smartphone, things that are happening on the other side of the world. You can, our that technology is replicating an ability that people naturally have and could use even to a greater extent than they are now. But it's that kind of activity is now being channeled through this technology, which is manufactured by corporations to extract money.
Yeah, money, data, information on all of us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the fact of modern life.
Yeah, that's the conundrum that we all face. This great technology that we have is always used against us, unfortunately.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. And, I hate the fact that public schools and private schools, they never really teach you anything of any significance in terms of our human history. And it's a tragedy. It's sad that we don't learn really anything. I mean, I think they're still teaching kids today about Columbus discovering America.
Yeah, I guess that was news to all the people that were here. Well, they probably didn't call it America, the original inhabitants. I think they call it something like Turtle Island.
I believe what I had learned a long time ago was the Chinese were here first.
Oh, you mean from other parts of the world?
Sure.
Coming here. Because
yes.
There were people here.
Absolutely.
When the Chinese, Native American peoples, they were around. They had their own civilizations, the Mayans and the Aztecs and the Mound Builders and Inca and South America. They had highly developed civilizations in terms of architecture and communications and things like that.
Right. And Mr. Cremo, I don't want to go back to what we were just talking about here with our friend Mr. Graham Hancock. But, a part of me, when I first saw that documentary, I was hoping it would have been you, not our friend Graham Hancock on Netflix. I wanted it to be you. So that was a bit of a shocker for me. I thought, why not Mr. Cremo instead? I believe you have enough credibility, and you've been around just as long as Graham Hancock as well, speaking about the same things, basically.
Well, alternative history is a big field, and there's lots of different areas. Graham kind of works on what I would call the more recent end of the time spectrum, the past 50,000, 100,000 years or so, maybe a little bit more. Whereas I'm dealing with the more deep time, and I've over the years had offers from different television producers to try to do things, and I've tried to work with them. The difficulty is that I found is that it's difficult to acquire imagery, citing imagery about the kinds of evidence that I talk about, which generally take the form of anomalously old stone tools, human bones, and things like that are kind of fragmentary. And getting the imagery for them is sometimes expensive. And,
Oh, yeah.
It hasn't really come to fruition at this point. But so it's easier to get imagery of the pyramids than to go into a museum and try to get permission to explore in the storerooms. It's just like, you were mentioning that show, The Mysterious Origins of Man, that I was on some years ago.
Yeah, back in 1996, I believe, is when that first appeared on NBC. And that was actually my introduction to you way back then, Mr. Cremo.
Yeah. So at that time, we tried to get permission for, the producer of the documentary, on my advice, tried to get permission to see artifacts in this museum that were, according to the scientific reports, millions of years old. But they wouldn't give him permission to go in and film them.
Yeah.
So you run into things like that.
Yeah, there's always trouble, for sure. There's always a block in the way. And speaking of that, what do you think and feel about another individual out there by the name of Mr. Zahi Hawass?
I don't know if he still is, but he was kind of like the director of antiquities.
He's still around, actually, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen him in some documentaries about Egypt recently. Of course, I'm not an Egyptologist myself, and I haven't focused very much on Egypt in my work. It's kind of, like I said, at the more recent end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of dealing with other stuff.
Right. I just never have heard you mention Zahi Hawass at any time, so I thought, I might as well mention him to you here.
Yeah, I know that for researchers who want to go into the pyramids or the Sphinx, they had to go through him.
Right.
So he was kind of like the gatekeeper. And of course, I'm interested in all the topics related to archaeology, but I've got my specific area that I focus on. But I've just heard or read or seen descriptions that sometimes he's less than cooperative, and sometimes
Yeah.
he's more willing to let them do what they have to do.
Yeah,
So,
it's a strange case where someone has so much power like that to prevent you from being able to do what you need to do. But unfortunately, that's what happens. Like the Smithsonian, that's another example.
yeah, it's kind of like in the first Indiana Jones movie. I think they had at the end of that, a visit to some museum. I think it was the Smithsonian, where they had all this stuff in their storerooms, different artifacts and sacred objects and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, I've had my own experiences like that.
Yeah.
Where I've gotten access to museums where artifacts are stored that most people don't know about and which aren't displayed to the public. So that kind of thing does go on.
Yeah, it's happened a lot.
In one sense, this is all part of what I call knowledge filtration.
Ah, yes.
Like, say, you have these gatekeepers who are responsible, they've got custody of these things. And in one sense, many of them, they don't think they're doing anything wrong. They're just thinking, I'm just being a responsible public servant, a responsible scientist. I went to the university, worked very hard for many years, got my bachelor's degree and master's degree and doctoral degree in archaeology. And I've kind of gone through the profession, and I got a post here at this museum, and I'm in charge of this collection and that collection. And of course, we don't display everything to the public. You can only display part of what you have. And yes, it's likely that these artifacts in this storeroom we're never going to display because they've been discredited. People, authorities in our field have said these are to be taken very seriously. And they just think, I'm being a responsible member of my profession. It's not like some conspiracy.
Right.
That was like conspiracy theorists, you're dreaming. But the effect of it is the same, whether it's a deliberate cover-up or whether it's just, the person in charge just thinking, well, I'm just doing what I've been professionally trained to do. But the effect is the same.
Right.
Whether it's a conspiracy, and I do think there are sometimes some conspiratorial things that go on. I'm not denying that. But in every case, it may not be like that. I don't know exactly, the scientists might say, I don't know exactly what's wrong with these things. But, I'm sure if I spoke to my colleague down the hall who's a little bit expert, he could fill me in more of the details and refer me to the appropriate literature. But, so they don't think that anything fishy is going on. So, but like I said, the effect is the same.
Yeah.
We don't get the complete set of facts that we need to make a really proper decision about what the actual story really was.
Yes, It's quite fascinating. Not in the sense where, well, let me rephrase that. I shouldn't say that. I should say that with institutional archaeology so biased against alternative points of view, I find it rather interesting that you yourself have still been able to sort of have a good career, I guess you can say, with this.
Well, there are some, all archaeologists aren't closed-minded and
Luckily, yeah.
narrowly focused on their discipline. There are many of them who understand that there are different ways of looking at the past. The modern scientific, materialist, physicalist method is one, but it's not the only one. And they're prepared to recognize, for example, well, there may be an Australian Aboriginal archaeology, an Native American Indian archaeology, that would recognize, for example, the presence of human beings in North America before Columbus. It's like, but or there may be a Vedic archaeology, based on the concept of cyclical time and extreme human antiquity and a non-material aspect to it. So there are many archaeologists in that category, and maybe it's because of that I've been able to present so many papers at meetings of major international archaeological organizations like the World Archaeological Congress or the European Association of Archaeologists. So it's that other element that you talk about is definitely there and is definitely very influential, but there is, I would say, a large group of this other kind of archaeologists who may not agree with me, but they think, well, this is a valid perspective and that should be heard and listened to, and people can make up their minds about it. The other group, they want to exclude it completely. They don't want to hear it. They don't want anyone else to hear it.
That's too bad.
So that element is definitely there, but it's not monolithic. It's not that all archaeologists are like that. A good number are at least willing to listen to some alternative perspective. And I think that's an important first step, because if minds are going to change, the first step is to be able to listen to some other idea.
Right, some other alternatives, no doubt. Well, I'm glad to hear that there are some individuals out there, archaeologists, that are open-minded to a few things. And, I wanted to bring this up to you earlier, but do dinosaurs still predate all the evidence of humans, by the way, Mr. Cremo?
Well, it depends. If it depends what one accepts as evidence. Yeah, if we accept only the evidence that's recognized by the modern scientific world, then you'd have to say, well, there's no evidence that humans exist at the time of the dinosaurs. According to the standard years, the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago when a big asteroid struck the Earth, and the environmental effects of that wiped out the dinosaurs. According to the modern ideas, humans like us only came into existence 300,000 years ago or less. So if you just confine yourself to the evidence accepted by modern science, the answer to the question is no. But if we look at other evidence, like the evidence from ancient wisdom traditions and even archaeological evidence, you do find evidence suggesting that humans existed after the time of the dinosaurs, before the time of the dinosaurs, and during the time of the dinosaurs.
Right. Yes, it's rather interesting. I mean, in Peru, in the city of Peru, in the city of Inca, they discovered these stones that depict man and dinosaurs interacting with each other, coexisting with each other. Do you believe that to be legit? These stones, rather, do you think the Inca stones are legit, Mr. Cremo, or do you think it's all a hoax?
Well, the Inca stones are very interesting. Like you said, they're round stones or oval stones with elaborate carvings on them, some of them showing dinosaurs and humans existing together. The discoverer of them, Dr. Cabrera, he said he found them in Cretaceous formations. So the Cretaceous period is the geological period that marks the end of the presence of the dinosaurs. It goes from, it includes that 65 million year extinction date. So that's there. And it occurred at the boundary of that, the more recent end of that age. So they would, scientists today wouldn't accept the Inca stones.
Oh, not at
genuine.
All. Yeah.
Yeah, they say, well, they're just some people in the village. They know that people are interested in these things. They'll pay money for them, and they make them. They manufacture them. Now, the problem was Dr. Cabrera wouldn't reveal the exact places where these things came from. And he said he excavated them. But, because he wasn't able to show other scientists the exact places where he found them, it couldn't really be easily corroborated. I mean, personally, I think humans did exist at the time of the dinosaurs. But if I try to persuade somebody of that, it would be good to have evidence that could be more easily corroborated.
Sure, yes. Yeah, it's a very interesting discovery, and it's still something that's debated to this very day. This is why I mentioned it to you. People still talk about this, but others throw it out the window.
Yeah, I think it deserves to be further studied to see if anybody can come up with finding one in situ in a Cretaceous formation. By in situ, I mean in place, solidly embedded in Cretaceous aged rock. In other words, rock at least 65 million years old. And, if that could be shown, that would be the ideal thing. But sometimes we don't get the ideal. We just get some tantalizing hint of what really may have been the history. In that regard, they're also in Texas at a place called Biloxi. There's the Biloxi River.
Yeah, right.
And there they found footprints of dinosaurs in the limestone rock. About 100 million years old or so. And alongside some of these dinosaur tracks were human footprints. So the standard idea is that no, those are just natural formations. Like the rock has eroded a little bit and it looks like a human footprint, but it's not. That's usually how it's explained. So once a graduate student of archaeology in Texas got in touch with me and asked if she could be of help in any of the research I was doing. I said, well, you're in Texas. Why don't you go to that Biloxi River place? And as an archaeology graduate student, let me know your opinion of it. Because the reason I was curious about it is I was aware of that case, but I didn't include it in my book, Forbidden Archaeology, because the scientist who originally reported them, a Christian creationist scientist, Dr. Henry Morris Jr., I think it was, he had publicized them and written about them, saying they were genuine, but later he changed his mind and decided, well, they look like human footprints, but they're really not. It's just because of the erosion and the discoloration of the rock. And so on that basis, since he had backtracked, you could say, I thought, okay, I'll just keep this aside. So I asked this student to go there and, from the standpoint of being an archaeologist, give her impressions. And she sent back a big report, saying they appear to be genuine as far as she could tell. So that's evidence that humans existed at the time of the dinosaurs, and I think there's also evidence that humans existed before the time of the dinosaurs.
Yeah, I agree. There's some strange anomalies there. And by the way, when you mentioned a creationist, I thought you were talking about Dr. Kent Hovind, by the way.
He's another
creationist.
He's another researcher in that. And I think, how I relate with faculty, they tend to be, most of them, young Earth types.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Who say that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old. And how I relate to that is, I've told some of them, I've been on some of their media shows.
Right.
Tell them, well, whether we think the Earth is a few billion or a few thousand years old, humans have been around since the beginning, and we didn't evolve from apes. And on that basis, we can kind of agree on some things, and we just have to differ about the age of the Earth.
Right, right. And like you said, Mr. Cremo, things work in cycles. And who's to say that, there wasn't another cycle out there that we have no knowledge about?
That's a fact.
That's the problem. That's the conundrum. And as we were just talking about here, in cycles, like you mentioned early on in the program here, what if I told you that I think we've already hit peak society and just in humanity in general? I think we sort of already reached the plateau, and I think there's going to be another cycle of destruction, maybe another flood. Who knows? But there's another sort of event coming. I sort of feel, Mr. Cremo. I'm not sure if you agree with me on that, but I definitely do feel a cycle is coming.
Yeah, I think, according to the Vedic cosmology, there's cycles within cycles within cycles. Like there's a big cycle where the universe is manifested and then goes into an unmanifest state.
Yeah.
In other words, it's created, it's destroyed.
Destroyed, right.
Although I prefer the terms manifest and unmanifest. But so there's that cycle. That's called a day of Brahma in the Vedic cosmology, and it lasts the whole cycle of a day and a night of Brahma.
Maybe we could call it a recycling, rather.
Yeah, that's 8.6 billion years, and within that larger cycle, there's another cycle of Manvantars that each lasts about 300 million years, and it kind of starts at the beginning of Brahma's day, which is about 2 billion years ago, and there's 14 Manvantars. We're now in the 7th, and then between each one, there's a devastation. In other words, about every 300 million years, there's a big devastation that wipes out life on Earth. And then after that devastation, the Earth is repopulated, kind of using resources that are available on the next higher level of reality. It's almost like people store their digital information, their songs, pictures, documents, in what they call the cloud. So that if their phone or other device, phone or tablet, is lost, then they can recover all their information. They get a new phone or a new tablet or laptop or whatever, and just download everything again from the cloud. So I think the universe is set up like that. There are personalities and resources at higher levels that retain the information and other necessities to kind of restore life on Earth after these periodic devastations take place. So that kind of huge demonstration, it occurs about once every 300 million years. We're about 120 million years into the current Manvantar, according to the Vedic cosmological calendar. And that means the next big, huge devastation that will wipe out life on Earth is about 180 million years from now. So we got some time.
We've got some time, yes.
But within the Manvantar cycle, there's the cycle of the four yugas, which are called Satya, Treta, Dwapara, and Kali. And it's like the four seasons of the year. And Satya is like the spring, Treta is like the summer, Dwapara is like the fall, Kali is like the winter. In other words, the hard, difficult time. And according to the Vedic cosmological calendar, we've just entered, within the past few thousand years, the Kali Yuga, or the age of quarrel and hypocrisy and ever-increasing social and environmental disturbance. And we're just at the beginning of that phase. It lasts for another 427,000 years, and it'll kind of conclude in a kind of a mini devastation. And then another Satya Yuga, another golden age will come. And just like, after every winter, there's another spring.
Right. And Mr. Cremo.
So your intuition is correct.
Yes.
We're entering a very difficult time.
And Mr. Cremo, do you think we're going to be hit with another flood or an asteroid? What do you think is going to happen?
According to the Vedic text, it's a flood.
A flood,
kind of a universal flood.
Interesting.
But, generally asteroids, comets, meteors are considered inauspicious signs that nothing good is going to happen.
Yeah, I hear you. Nothing good is going to happen. And eventually, mankind will eventually have to leave this planet. One day.
Yes.
Where we will go, I have no idea. But we definitely will be leaving this planet, I'm sure, in the future.
Yeah, there are descriptions about what happens towards the end of the universe.
I'm very fascinated by this, by the way. I don't know why, but I know it's not good to sort of skip through a book and go right towards the end, but I am very, very fascinated what's going to happen with the demise of Earth.
Yeah.
Scary stuff.
Yeah, in the 12th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a description of what happens at the end of the Kali Yuga. It contains predictions of the gradual process of deterioration, as you were suggesting when we started this phase of our talk. So
yeah, we'll find out soon enough.
My guru actually says hopefully my disciples will have, like you said, leave this plane of reality and go to that higher plane before this Kali Yuga goes on much further, because it's not going to be fun.
Right. It won't be fun. And luckily we won't be around to experience it ourselves, but I would be lying, Mr. Cremo, if I said I did not want to be there for that event, because I definitely would love to see it. And I mean that not in a negative way. I just am fascinated by that. Who wouldn't be?
Yeah, it is kind of fascinating to see the operation of the different forces there are in the universe. Yeah, there are times like earthquakes. I've been through earthquakes, hurricanes, things like that. I haven't been in a tornado, but yeah, when you see the forces of nature and operation in a way that's very destructive, it can be. I've been present for volcano eruptions.
Yeah, that's
Another
Mm-hmm.
fascinating thing.
Right. And by the way, going back to
according to the.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Cremo. Sorry.
No. I talk too much.
I was just backtracking to something that I forgot to mention here before. The Zapata print, by the way, the track discovered in New Mexico. It's a human footprint, by the way, discovered in New Mexico. That apparently is 299 million years old, by the way, they say.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that. What is it called? Zapata?
The Zapata track, right.
Yeah, I've heard of that case. Is it? I forget all the details about it. Is it one track or is it several?
I think it might just be one. If I remember correctly, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard about that. I've read about it, but the details of the case aren't coming into my mind right at the moment.
Yeah, don't worry. I totally forgot about that until just right now, and I thought, oh, I should have mentioned that. But yeah, this is slightly interesting. I mean, humans weren't supposed to be around that time.
No, definitely not. 300 million years ago. That would be...
That's crazy.
Towards the beginning of the time of the dinosaurs.
It's pretty frightening. And it just sort of solidifies the whole notion that humans are way older than what we are essentially taught by textbooks and the so-called experts.
Yeah, well, even if they're totally honest about the methodology that they're employing, they will say, and they do say often, we're not giving the absolute truth here, it could change in light of further evidence and things like that. So if they're really honest, all they can really say is, well, using what we consider to be the best evidence that we have, analyzing it, having our best people, the best people in our profession, analyze it according to what we consider to be our best theories, we conclude that human beings have only been around for 300,000 years, but they can't honestly claim from their methodology that that's the absolute truth.
Right.
It could change.
Yeah.
So now I operate on the basis of a different knowledge system where I consider a kind of evidence that they don't consider to be evidence, and that is statements of the Vedic literature. Now, if I go to an archaeology conference, I can't expect them to accept a statement from the Vedic literature that human beings have been present for many millions of years. That's not evidence for them. But what I can do, and I have done, is to say, well, if I make it into a hypothesis, if what the Vedic texts say is true, then we should expect that in archaeology, if we look at the history of archaeology, we're going to find reports of archaeologists, geologists, and other scientists finding human bones, human artifacts, and human footprints many millions of years old. And if you actually look through the entire history of archaeology, you find, from the hundreds of years ago up to the very present, there have been literally hundreds of such discoveries, enough to fill up a 900-page book like Forbidden Archaeology. And then it becomes a question, well, why is it that if these discoveries are there in the original scientific reports, why aren't they in the textbooks today? And the only answer that I can see to that is because of this process of knowledge filtration. If it doesn't fit the current theories, it gets set aside, forgotten, explained away in some very unsatisfactory manner. So...
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It truly is. It truly is. And Mr. Cremo, I know we don't have too much time here, but I did want to ask you about giants really quickly here.
I accept that in the past, and maybe even at present, there have been or may still be giants. And by giants, I mean somebody 10 feet or more tall, because there are lots of people who are 7 feet tall.
Sure.
Some of them are on the basketball teams. And there's even a few people on this planet who are 8 feet tall, or maybe even one that is 9 feet tall. But there's nobody around 10 feet tall or more. There are lots of reports of such things, but they tend not to be published in the professional scientific literature. They're more or less published in newspapers and magazines, things like that. And it's also very difficult. I mean, although there are many accounts of such things being found and placed in museums like the Smithsonian, if you go around today, it's very difficult, almost impossible, to find any of the physical remains of giants. Now, there is the most credible report that I found, which has some possibility of being corroborated, is a report from the early 20th century, around the time, late 19th century, early 20th century, in a place called Castelnau in France. An anthropologist named Dr. Lapouge reported the discovery of large-sized human bones, not a complete skeleton, but a thigh bone and a humerus. Humerus is the upper arm bone in between the shoulder and the elbow. He measured the size of the femur, and anthropologists can tell you from the length of the femur how big the person with a femur, a thigh of that size would have stood. And it was calculated the person that had this human femur was 11 feet tall. And there were photographs of the bones published in this scientific journal. And if it would be possible to locate in some museum in France any of these large-sized human bones, that might wind up being one of the first well-documented cases of physical evidence for giants.
Yes, it's pretty wild. And of course, in the Bible, it even talks about giants. For those that are religious, you definitely get that that passage there. I think it might be Genesis. I'm not sure exactly the whole quote, but I know they say there were giants in the earth in those days.
In the earth.
Yeah.
The Nephilim.
Yes, you do have you have the Anunnaki, you have Goliath, the Cyclops. Giants were all over the place, and there is evidence suggesting that giant humanoids did exist on Earth. It's pretty overwhelming. There's all sorts of articles from mainstream newspapers, all about a small towns discovering these giant skeletons during mound excavations.
Well, it's even a part of just ordinary science that before 5,000 years ago, most living things were bigger than they are today.
Right.
Yeah, the bears were bigger, the elephants were bigger, the plants were bigger. Like in California here, we've got the California redwood trees, which I think are the largest living things on Earth. 300 feet tall. Like pretty amazing things. But many of them are thousands of years old. So I think those California redwood trees are a remnant from that previous era when living things were larger, and I don't see any reason why humans couldn't have been larger as well. Actually, in the Vedas, there's the story of a king, Muchukunda, who went to sleep in a cave a long, long time ago. And he's from the age when people were much bigger. So when he was finally awakened about 5,000 years ago, he went outside the cave and he saw that everything was smaller. Because as you enter the Kali Yuga, which we're in now, things get smaller and less well developed. So he could tell, okay, I've woken up now. I can see what time it is in the cosmic sense of the word. This must be the Kali Yuga because everything looks all small and shriveled up. And there are paintings, classical Indian paintings done of the scene where he's kind of like towering over everyone else as he walks out of the cave. So that's interesting.
Oh, yes, it definitely is. And Mr. Cremo, I could talk to you for hours on end. And, as I close the show here, I do have a few more questions to ask you. Just a few more, not many. But, I did want to ask you about Bigfoot. Do you believe that Bigfoot exists?
Yes, actually, in Forbidden Archeology, I have a whole chapter on evidence for living ape men. And mainly it takes the form of footprints, but there are other types of evidence as well, hairs and sightings and things of that sort. I think today on this planet, we've got human beings, we've got apes and monkeys that we're coexisting with, and apparently we're also sharing this planet with creatures that somewhat resemble the ape men, like Australopithecus and Homo erectus that modern science talks about. So all three are coexisting on this planet at the present moment. And I think if we look at all of the evidence, we'll see that this coexistence was also there in the past, millions of years ago. Yes, Australopithecus existed, this ape man. Ancient apes and monkeys were there, but there were also humans like us in very ancient times. I think what's happened is that modern science has edited the evidence, eliminated the evidence for a human presence in very ancient times to support their evolutionary theory of human origins, where Australopithecus turns into Homo erectus, which turns into Homo sapiens. I think if you look at all the evidence and not just the fragment of evidence that's there in the current textbooks, you'll see that the real pattern is one of coexistence rather than evolution.
And to add on to that, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the story of Zana, the Russian Neanderthal slave in the 1800s. I'm not sure if you are quite familiar with that.
I cite that case.
Oh, do you?
In Forbidden Archeology, in the chapter on evidence for living ape men.
My
and
goodness.
women.
I don't even recall that, and I do have that book somewhere here in the house. I bought it a very long time ago. I completely forgot that you did actually mention that. But yes, for those
Maybe
who...
it's in your weight room.
Right.
It's a pretty heavy book.
It is. It is. It's a pretty... You know, you could probably paralyze someone with it if you threw it at them.
Yeah.
It's a massive book. But yes, for those who don't know the story of Zana, definitely look into it here. I wish we could go over it, but I don't want to take up any more of your time, Mr. Cremo. It's always an honor and pleasure to have you here on the program. And Mr. Cremo, I will leave you with the final word here. Go ahead and plug anything you like, but of course, if you have anything else to add here or say that you didn't get to when we first started this, please go ahead and let it all out here, Mr. Cremo.
Well, I invite people to visit my website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com. There they can find links to upcoming and archived podcasts and radio shows that I've appeared on. They'll also see the upcoming talks, like in March 2023. I'll be at the Biomed Expo in Los Angeles from the 24th to the 26th of March 2023. We've got early bird tickets available at reduced cost. And on the website, they can also find information about obtaining some of my books. Like my latest published work is called My Science, My Religion. And it goes over many of the topics that we talked about today. There's my book, Human Devolution, a Vedic Alternative to Darwin's Theory. There's also, of course, the original classic Forbidden Archeology. So, and we have a special offer that if anyone purchases from my website, mcremo.com, a copy of My Science, My Religion, which shows how I integrate my spirituality with my science, they'll have the opportunity to also receive a free copy of Bhagavad Gita, one of the Vedic texts that have greatly inspired my my research and other work. So I encourage any of the listeners who want to follow up on what we've said on the show here to visit that website, mcremo.com.
Very nice. Once again, thank you so much, Mr. Cremo, for being a part of the program. Maybe I might catch you in Los Angeles sometime during this presentation here.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll stop by if I can and say hello to you in person, Mr. Cremo.
Fantastic.
Very nice. Once again, thank you so much, Mr. Cremo. We will talk again soon, my friend.
Yes,
right.
That would be fine with me.
You got it, my friend. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Good night. And there he goes, boys and girls. That was Mr. Michael Cremo. I hope you enjoyed that one. I mean, I really enjoyed that one. It's always pretty wild whenever I talk to Mr. Cremo. You know, as a child, I was watching that special that he was on, and I was blown away by all of it. All these things I had never heard of before. It was pretty wild. So I understand why now some folks that watched Graham Hancock's Netflix special there, they probably freaked out some people out there that have never been exposed to these things. But for us, you know, that have sort of been through all this already many, many moons ago, none of it is controversial or wild or crazy. These are just things that we had already acknowledged even way back then. But yes, once again, folks, I do thank all of you for being a part of the program and hanging out and sticking with me here tonight, even though there were some technical issues, which I'm still having right now. But we'll fix all these things as we go along. But yes, once again, boys and girls, thanks for pressing play. I will return. I'll return for all of you rather soon. And yes, for those that want bonus material, please go to patreon.com/Michael Deacon. And yes, that's where you'll find bonus content of the program. Definitely check that out if you can. It will help me out for sure. It helps keep the lights on. It helps buy new equipment when it is needed. And I hope I don't have to do that here tonight. I hope not. Good Lord, I hope not. But yes, without you, this show is dead in the water. And I wish you all the very best, no matter where you are on this island Earth. Keep your heads above water, boys and girls. It's going to get rough this next year here. And we are pretty much close to the end of 2022. So definitely stay safe out there and keep your heads up, like I said. And my God, folks, who knows what's going to happen in 2023? Will the cycle be here? Will we have another flood on our hands like the biblical flood? This story that we are all so familiar with, is that what's going to happen next year or the year after? Who the hell knows? It's all frightening and all rather interesting, boys and girls. And with that said, the world is a mysterious place and life itself is a mystery. Until next time, good night, everybody.
Thank you.